All right, good morning, everyone. So this morning, I'm going to try my best to represent the state of code development across GNU Radio, all the amazing work that goes on across the community for more stable, maintainable, and feature-rich releases of GNU Radio throughout the year. And then also kind of a path forward, go through the state of GR 4.0. And we're also going to get an update on the Volt project from Johannes and Michael as well. So my name's Josh. I am a research scientist at Peraton Labs and one of the maintainers here at GNU Radio, and heavily involved in the 4.0 development, which we'll spend quite a bit of time looking into in this talk. All right, so it's a busy year for GNU Radio releases. We started off after last GRCon working towards GR 3.10. And 3.10 included the GRPDU module, which took a lot of out-of-tree work from Sandia and brought that in as an official in-tree module. GRIIO, which brought in support for IIO devices from analog devices. And we got a lot of support in upstreaming that from ADI. And it also brought in this custom buffers feature, which we've talked about a lot. This is a feature that streamlines the data movement in and out of accelerators and makes it much easier for GNU Radio to work in these heterogeneous environments. And another feature that really, this is the one that caused us to tick up the API revision, is the move from log for CPP as our underlying logging library to SPD log. And we have Marcus to thank for that work. So we were able, in 3.10, we were able to get this into the Ubuntu 22.04 distribution. So if you have Ubuntu 22 and you type in apt install GNU Radio, 3.10 is right there installed on your system. So that we have Maitland to thank for that, who is our Debian maintainer. He's right over here. So give Maitland a round of applause. So we'll talk a bit more about packaging in a few slides, but there's a lot of work from people behind the scenes that get things packaged in a way that just makes it so much easier. And then throughout the year, we had several maintenance releases, and we have Jeff Long to thank for this, who is not able to join us this year. But Jeff Long is our release manager, maintainer that gets things out on time and does a tremendous amount of work. So more recently, the new Sketch project, which we've talked quite a bit about in the last couple of years, moved into the main repo as the Dev 4.0 branch. So that is our path forward for development towards GNU Radio 4.0, which we'll spend more time talking about. And just before the conference, Jeff put out our 3.10.4 and 3.9.8, which are our latest releases, which you can grab and stay on top of things. So 3.10, already talked about a bit. It is a much smaller, what we call irritation factor. So 3.9 and 3.8 brought in some heavy changes to GNU Radio. We went from Python 2 to Python 3 and 3.8, and some other big CMake changes. And then from 3.8 to 3.9, we brought in PyBind 11 instead of Swig. So those changes, if you're an out-of-tree module maintainer, those caused you to have to do a very non-trivial amount of work to get up to date. The change to 3.10 was a much smaller step, so it's probably unlikely that specific change caused big problems within your out-of-tree modules, and that's our stance going forward. That's where we want to keep things, is make it less irritating to move GNU Radio forward. Only change things as necessary. Another thing I want to note here is for this 3.10 release, 92 unique contributors. So a lot of people contributing directly to the GNU Radio code base. So what is our current maintenance strategy? So Jeff Long, like I mentioned, keeps this running like a well-oiled machine. If you have PRs to submit, pull requests, the main branch is where they go. So everyone keeps things up to date on the main branch, and then Jeff picks off the things that are suitable to go into the maintenance branches and makes those releases. So main 3.10 is where our 3.10 releases come from. Main 3.9 is, there's no more planned releases unless something serious comes up, but 3.9 is close enough to 3.10 that we don't feel like we need to maintain 3.9 any longer. And 3.8 is bug fix only. We realize that 3.8 exists in the ecosystem. There's some out-of-tree modules that are still 3.8, but we're also not maintaining that as well. 3.10 is the path forward. And then the other thing that we'll ask is if you want to propose or you have some kind of big pervasive changes, let's look forward to 4.0 to do those. Let's use those to accelerate the progress of 4.0. And then if something is safe enough really to get back into the main code branches, then we'll consider putting that back in main, and then it can roll into the maintenance releases. All right, so again, a lot of, probably not the exciting stuff here, but our strategy for these releases, we're trying to avoid breaks in the API at this point. We're really focusing on stability, reliability. And so the main branch, we allow for these API breaks, but code that gets pushed into main that breaks API might not make, well, it won't make it into the maintenance releases. It might just sit there for a while until we accumulate enough things that break API that we need to make a, say, 3.11 release. So what's an API break? It's something that's going to impact our out-of-tree module ecosystem. It's something that's going to break your stuff. And it might be minor, and we're hoping that anything we do would be very minor breakage, but it's something we're trying to avoid at this point. So there is no current plan for 3.11. We're just going to keep putting out 3.10 releases going forward, trying to make GNU Radio more stable, more maintainable, more feature-rich. So we're going to keep this at 3.10 for the foreseeable future. Okay, so just another summary of these maintenance releases. These happen because of the aggressive backporting that Jeff does, and they are, our policy is we are doing these minor changes and keeping these rolled out on a continuous basis, on a quarterly basis. So Jeff puts out these releases once every quarter. Last one just came out. We should expect another one probably in January sometime. So just to reiterate, again, our commitment to stability as the maintainers is we want to avoid as long as possible the frustration that came with 3.8 and 3.9. Now, we recognize that that frustration was necessary. We needed to modernize the code base in these ways. A lot of times you get a dependency that just becomes unmaintainable in modern distributions. It becomes, the dependency becomes unmaintained. It's hard to install across a lot of distributions. So we took care of a lot of that in 3.8, 3.9. 3.10 and going forward, we want to just take smaller steps in terms of these pervasive changes and reserve 4.0 for the big aggressive changes. So as a community, we should be very proud of the state that GNU Radio is in. We are able to make these continuous releases and keep things rolling out into the community. So just one thing to remember here is that there's a lot of people involved in the maintenance of the GNU Radio code base. There's a lot of PRs that get submitted, and the best way that we can ensure the stability of the code base is if there's people to get in and review those PRs. I would say that's our biggest bottleneck to getting features in GNU Radio is PRs sit there, and there's one or two of us that look at it. If you're in the GitHub and you see something that someone submitted, take a look at it, try it out. That's a great way to help the development going forward. Especially if it's a part of the code that you understand, you're familiar with. If it's, say it's in the GR digital module and you're very well familiar with that code, jump in there and take a look at the code and provide your comments. That helps us out tremendously. So if you submit a PR, go in and review some other ones too. That's a great way to help out. If you're submitting PRs, try to keep them moving. If it's a draft, if it's not completed, if you're just putting out an idea there, try to clean those up and get your draft PRs out of there as soon as possible. And then when submitting submitting your PRs, we have a set of guidelines about keeping the commit log clean. So just a lot of business here that helps us out big time. So one thing we want to do is we want to highlight a lot of the exciting work that's gone on in the community. And first I want to give a shout out to Clayton, who's here. Clayton did a tremendous amount of work in two particular areas in these 3.10 releases in the last year. The first was removing a lot of our dependence on Boost. So Boost has provided a lot of advanced features for C++ language, but it's a big dependency. And it also can be challenging to maintain across a lot of distributions. So the less we rely on Boost, the easier it is for us to support our releases. So Clayton got in and removed a lot of that dependence just by updating to standard C++ and a lot of other changes. And the other thing that's exciting from a maintenance perspective, Clayton got in there and fixed our intermittently failing CI tests. So we had some CI tests that would, 8 out of 10 times it passes fine, and then those other times we'd have to go in and say, oh, why'd the CI fail? Well, that test just fails sometimes. Merge, and that's not a great place to be. So now we have much more solid CI thanks to Clayton. So Clayton's here today, so let's give him a round of applause. All right, so another shout out is Bjorn Curler. So I haven't met Bjorn personally, I don't believe he's here, but took it upon himself to update out-of-tree modules across the entire ecosystem. Now, I don't know what the final number was, but I know it's dozens, perhaps hundreds of out-of-tree modules, just going to, creating forks of these, updating them, submitting PRs back to the main branches. And since 3.10 is going to be around for a long time, this is a great help to the community. So if you're a maintainer of an out-of-tree module and you got a PR from Bjorn, take a look at it. If you're able to upstream that, that's great, because we maintain CGRAN. Is it cgran.org? cgran.org, which is it's a non-curated list of out-of-tree modules in the ecosystem. And so the more of those that show up as 3.10, that's more code that people are able to use the current GNU Radio with. So let's give a round of applause to Bjorn. All right. So as far as packaging goes, there's a lot of work behind the scenes that our packaging maintainers do, so that from your distribution, you can just go in and apt install, yum install, whatever it is, GNU Radio, and it just installs. And if you look on our GitHub, there's a little badge right here. It says in repositories, and this brings up a whole list of the repositories that GNU Radio is in, the distributions. So a lot of the newer ones are updated with our latest release. And so we have our packagers to thank for that. So this is definitely the preferred way at the moment to install GNU Radio, if you can just use your distribution's package manager for Linux, right, if you're on Linux. We also, thanks to Ryan Voltz, have a Conda ecosystem for GNU Radio. So especially if you're on Windows and Mac, this is the only robust way that we know of to get GNU Radio up and running on Windows and Mac. And also, he's done a lot of work in our CI to tie this in, so that we can see when changes in the GNU Radio code base are going to affect building on Windows and Mac as well. So take a look at this if you're not familiar with the Conda install. If you're using Windows, or even if you're using Linux and you like Conda, take a look at it. It's another very solid way of installing GNU Radio. So it's on our wiki. For Ubuntu users, we also maintain a PPA, not as heavily maintained as it should be, but it's currently up to the latest release. And so if you add this repository, if you add the PPA, then you can install GNU Radio on Ubuntu 20 and Ubuntu 22, and you can get the actual latest version, not just what originally came with with the distribution. But there is some help wanted here. This is something that if someone is really interested or involved in the Ubuntu community, not only would we like help managing the PPA, automating that, if someone's tied into that Ubuntu community, it would be nice to get these maintenance releases flowing through the actual Ubuntu main repos, if somebody has connections or knows how to do that. So Maitland keeps Debian very up to date, and the Ubuntu packaging just derives from Debian. There's a few extra steps with their tooling, but if someone knows that ecosystem well, this would be a great help to us as a community. And then, of course, there's installing from source. When do you want to install from source? Obviously, if you have to modify the code yourself, if you need multiple versions concurrently, so you want to have your own prefixes, or if you want to operate or need some features on the main branch specifically. PyBombs has gone very lightly maintained. So I know for many years we recommended just use PyBombs and it will grab the latest, all the dependencies, manage all that. That's a very hard problem for a project of this size to manage on our own. So that's why we have really moved towards package distribution as the way to do this rather than our own managed thing. So PyBombs, use at your own risk. It is not something that you'll probably get a lot of support for when it doesn't work. So a couple of things that Derek mentioned in his talk yesterday. We are looking for help, and some of this very well could be funded by the grants that we've received and grants that we're going for. We are looking for better GNU Radio binary installers, so you can just double-click install GNU Radio on Windows. That would be great, something that would really help us in the educational communities, and also macOS and packaging of outer tree modules. So if you didn't get a chance to hear Derek's talk, please go back and take a listen. It's on YouTube. Also, ongoing and maintenance support. This is something, like I mentioned before, with helping out with the PRs, reviewing things. We have an issue queue. A lot of these are feature requests. It'd be great if GNU Radio did this. But there's a lot of them that are marked as good first issue. So if you're interested in making your first contribution into the GNU Radio code base, take a look and grab one of those issues, see if you can fix it. A lot of them are just very small, manageable things. So that can be helpful. And as a task, we are looking for people to step up. I think Derek said to email jobs@gnuradio.org if you're interested in taking a bigger role here.